Imagine a continent rich in culture, resources and history, a land where powerful kingdoms thrived and diverse peoples coexisted. Now imagine that same land divided into pieces, not by its inhabitants but by foreign powers who cared little for its people or their future. This is the story of how Africa was divided. By the late 19th century, European powers were racing to expand their empires. The Industrial Revolution had fueled their ambitions, and they were in search of new territories to exploit for resources and markets. The competition was fierce and the stakes were high. Africa, with its vast resources of gold, diamonds and fertile land, became the ultimate prize. The continent was rich in minerals and other natural resources that were highly coveted by European nations. The allure of wealth and power drove them to stake their claims. But this scramble for Africa wasn't driven by diplomacy, it was fueled by greed. European nations were willing to go to great lengths to secure their interest, often disregarding the well-being of the indigenous populations. Treaties were signed and borders were drawn with little regard for the people who lived there. In 1884, European leaders gathered in Berlin, Germany, not to help Africa, but to decide how to share its riches. The Berlin Conference was convened by Otto von Bismarck, the German Chancellor, to establish rules for the colonization of Africa. It was a pivotal moment in history that would shape the future of the continent. Not a single African representative was present. The decisions made at the conference were done without any input from the people whose lives would be most affected. It was a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play and the disregard for African sovereignty. Imagine strangers deciding the fate of your home while you weren't even invited to the table. The impact of the Berlin Conference was profound and far-reaching. It led to the partitioning of Africa with artificial borders that ignored ethnic and cultural divisions, resulting in conflicts that persist to this day. The legacy of the Berlin Conference is a testament to the exploitation and injustice that characterized the colonial era. The Berlin Conference lasted from November 1884 to February 1885. This pivotal event in history saw European powers come together to discuss the future of Africa, a continent rich in resources and diverse cultures. The conference was held in Berlin, Germany, and was attended by representatives from over a dozen European nations. Led by Germany's Otto von Bismarck, European powers like Britain, France, Belgium and Portugal divided Africa among themselves. Bismarck, the German Chancellor, played a crucial role in orchestrating the conference, ensuring that Germany would have a significant influence in the decisions made. The leaders of these European nations were driven by a desire for economic gain, political power and territorial expansion. Their goal? Avoid conflicts with one another as they carved up the continent. They sought to establish rules for the colonization and trade in Africa, hoping to prevent any disputes that could lead to war among themselves. The agreements made during the conference were formalized in the General Act of the Berlin Conference, which laid out the guidelines for the division and administration of African territories. Borders were drawn on maps, cutting through ethnic groups, kingdoms, and communities. These arbitrary lines often ignored the existing social, cultural, and political landscapes of Africa. The new boundaries were based on European interests and rivalries, rather than the realities on the ground. The conference's decisions ignored African traditions, cultures, and relationships. The European powers were primarily concerned with their own strategic and economic interests, paying little attention to the impact their decisions would have on the people of Africa. This disregard for African societies led to the disruption of traditional ways of life and the imposition of foreign rule. Entire nations were split, while rival groups were forced to live under the same rule. The new borders often placed hostile groups within the same territories, leading to tensions and conflicts. Conversely, some ethnic groups found themselves divided by these new boundaries, separated from their kin and traditional lands. These divisions planted the seeds for conflicts that persist even today. The legacy of the Berlin Conference is still felt across Africa, as many of the borders drawn during that time remain in place. The arbitrary divisions have contributed to ongoing disputes, civil wars, and struggles for independence, shaping the political and social landscape of the continent for generations. But the conference wasn't just about lines on a map. It was about control. European powers exploited Africa's wealth, extracting resources at the expense of its people. Africans were enslaved, their lands stolen, their cultures suppressed. Entire communities were forced into labor to fuel the industrial revolutions of Europe. Yet, Africans resisted. Leaders like Samori Touré, Ya Asantewaa, and Menelik II fought valiantly against colonial forces. But the technological and military advantage of Europe made these struggles an uphill battle. The division of Africa left a legacy of instability. The arbitrary borders drawn by colonial powers disregarded the complex tapestry of ethnicities, cultures, and languages that existed long before their arrival. These divisions have had profound and lasting impacts on the continent. Borders created at the Berlin Conference remain largely unchanged today. The conference, held in 1884 to 1885, saw European powers carve up Africa with little regard for the indigenous populations. These borders were drawn with the primary aim of serving colonial interests, often splitting communities and merging rival groups. But these borders often divide ethnic groups and force cooperation between rivals. This has led to a myriad of issues, including ethnic conflicts and political instability. The forced amalgamation of diverse groups into single political entities has often resulted in friction and strife as these groups vie for power and resources. This has contributed to political tensions, civil wars, and economic challenges. Yet Africa is resilient. Despite the numerous conflicts and economic hardships, the continent has shown remarkable strength and adaptability. Many African nations have made significant strides in development, governance, and economic growth. Despite its troubled history, the continent has risen time and again. The spirit of resilience is deeply embedded in the African people who have continually fought for their rights and sovereignty. This resilience is evident in the numerous achievements and advancements made across the continent. Movements for independence in the mid-20th century saw African nations reclaim their sovereignty. These movements were driven by a desire for self-determination and freedom from colonial rule. The success of these movements marked a significant turning point in African history as nations began to chart their own path. Today, Africa is home to over 1.4 billion people speaking over 2,000 languages, a testament to its incredible diversity and strength. This diversity is one of Africa's greatest assets, contributing to its rich cultural heritage and vibrant societies. The continent's young population is also a source of great potential, with many young Africans leading the way in innovation, entrepreneurship, and social change. As Africa continues to navigate its complex history and present challenges, its people remain a beacon of hope and resilience for the future. What if Africa's borders were drawn by Africans? Perhaps kingdoms like the Ashanti, Zulu, and Mali would have thrived into modern nations. Perhaps trade networks, cultural ties, and alliances would have flourished naturally, creating stronger, united nations. Instead, the Berlin Conference left Africa with borders designed to benefit colonial powers, not its people. This is a history we must confront to understand the challenges and opportunities Africa faces today. Africa's story is one of resilience. While its division brought pain, its people have never stopped fighting for a better future. By learning this history, we honor those who resisted and those who continue to build a united Africa today. What do you think? Can Africa overcome the legacy of its colonial past? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep this conversation alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories of history's footprints.